Then there are different ways of doing your assessment. You can do it in kind of a receptive language format. And for this, the kid needs to be able to point to or look at or give you, they need to be able to follow that instruction, right? So not always great for kids with autism, right? Because they don't always know how to follow that. We'll talk about a really good assessment format for them in a second. But if you're working with an individual with a motor impairment, you might be able to do look at. You'll place 2 items out and you'll say, look at the ball, and if they can look, right? I've done symbol assessments before with individuals who don't have motor skills very solid in terms of their upper body, but they've got a good foot point, right? And so, okay, well, point to, and they point with their foot, and I just put the items down by their feet. So however you do it, but for this kind, it's got to be the person understands the instruction. So if I say point to apple, they know that that means to do this pointing motion, and then if they actually point to the apple when I say point to the apple, then that's some evidence that they also understand the representation for apple, if it was a photograph or a symbol or a word, for example. Another way that we can do this is yes-no. For a yes-no format, the student has to have a clear, consistent yes-no response. So again, not always great for kids with autism, but sometimes very useful for individuals with complex motor challenges, right? So again, I've worked with individuals who have, kind of an eye blink for yes and a look away for no, and that's all they have for communication, right? But I can take that and use that. Is this an apple? And they look away, right? And I held out a comb. Great, they know that that's not an apple. They can say no. This is the format that I use most often for kids with autism, visual matching format. So requires the ability to match one thing to another. Kids with autism seem to be quite good at this. And if they're not, we can teach it pretty quickly in an assessment format. So if I come in to do a symbol assessment and the kid doesn't know how to match, I can do some good discrete trial training, do a few trials of practice matching, teach the kid how to match, and then do my assessment. Right? Kids with autism, though, tend to be pretty good matchers. So that's often what I'll use when I'm looking at kids with autism for sure. So here's what the receptive language format would look like. You put 2 or more items down, say on the table, 2 objects, 2 photos, 2 graphic symbols, 2 written words, so that the person can see them, and you say, give me the ball, or touch the ball, or point to the ball. And you're looking to see if they can or cannot point to, get, give the right item. That's it. And so you're going to test all of those different items kind of randomly, in random order, over and over again in different pairs. So one time you might have the ball paired with a fork, and then you have the ball paired with balloon, and then you have the balloon paired with the washcloth. So you try to kind of like do it a few times and make sure that they understand. And you're going to check objects, check photos, check graphic symbols. If they're still going good, check text, right? And it's kind of like go along the progression until they can't do the task anymore, right? You're looking for about 80% accuracy. They might not know all of the symbols, that's okay, right? But you're looking for what representation do they seem to mostly be able to identify and understand. Because we want to be using a representation system that makes sense to them right now. That's not going to require a lot of learning, right? That makes sense? Okay, so that's the receptive language way of doing it. Here's the yes-no way of doing it. 1 item at a time, show the item to the person and say, is this a, right? So I could hold this up and say, is this a computer? And I'd expect a no response. Is this water? I'd expect a yes response. And so for every item, I'd go and sometimes I'll say what it actually is, and sometimes I'll ask if it's something else, and check to make sure that I've got yes and no responses happening when they should. And again, I'll check objects, photographs, graphic symbols, and then perhaps text as well, okay? The visual matching format is just like kind of, if you're familiar with discrete trial training, kids at tables doing table work kind of tasks, that's essentially what we're doing here. Put down 2 photographs, 2 object cues, 2 graphic symbols, 2 word cards, whatever it is that we're testing, and then present an object. So I might have a symbol for ball, and a symbol for balloon on the table, and I hand the kid the ball, and I say match. And can the kid put the ball with the right symbol? That's it, right? So I'll start with match object to object to photo, object to graphic symbol, object to text. And again, how kind of complex can I get before the individual has difficulty, okay? So that's what we're looking to do. We want to figure out kind of the most complex system that the individual is able to understand kind of most of the time, right? So about 80%. Because again, right, they haven't been exposed to every picture communication symbol in the land. If you've used board makers, sometimes you look at a symbol and you go, huh? What is that, right? And you can read the word, which then helps you, but you don't know until somebody tells you, right? You wouldn't know unless there was the word printed. And for our kids, it might be the same thing. They may not know until somebody goes, oh, this symbol here is that. Oh, okay, now I know. But about 80% of it, they're good, they can identify correctly. That's about what you're looking for. That's kind of the sweet spot, okay? Best to do your symbol assessment a few times over. And to also do your assessment in a couple of different contexts. So the first context I usually do a symbol assessment in is nice, quiet, nobody else is there, not distracting, so I can get a really good sense of, in the best possible conditions, what does this kid know? But then I also want to make sure that I check in a noisier environment where there are distractions, because that's where the kid's going to use the visuals. Right? So if the kid only understands picture communication symbols in a little room with nobody else there and nobody else making noise and nothing else is moving, but they don't understand it in the classroom, there's no point using picture communication symbols because it means nothing in the classroom. They can't focus sufficiently and ignore everything else that's going on to understand. In that case, maybe photographs are what they can understand in a noisy environment. So again, it's not just about what can they understand in the best possible conditions, it's what can they understand and use in a variety of situations, right, in real life places. So I'll check both, right, and kind of make sure. So like I said again, about 75 to 80% accuracy in terms of symbol assessment. That's kind of what you're looking for. So what happens, and this has happened to me, you go do a symbol assessment and the person doesn't demonstrate the ability to identify symbols of any type, not even objects. Can't match three-dimensional object to an identical three-dimensional object. I have two balls, I give him one ball, he cannot match it to the same ball. Does not know. I've worked with those individuals, right? Sometimes I've got individuals who have pretty significant cognitive impairments, sometimes multisensory impairments. So I've worked with kids who are deaf-blind and have autism. I've worked with kids who are blind and have autism. I've worked with kids who are deaf and have autism, who have had those kinds of challenges. They couldn't even do 3D to 3D, object-object matching. So in that case, I want to check a couple of things before I make the final determination that they don't get it. I'm going to make sure that the student actually understands the assessment task, right? Is this that he really doesn't know how to match ball to ball? That he doesn't know that they're the same thing? Or is this that he doesn't know how to match, period? If the issue is that he does not know how to match, period, I might spend a little bit more time to teach matching and then symbol assess again to see if, now that I spent a bit of time teaching him how to match, is he able to do it? If yes, great. If not, okay, then we might have to use objects. Sometimes it's about motivation. So I've gone and done a symbol assessment before for a kid that I'm pretty darn sure understands graphic symbols. Like there's someone else in the classroom who has graphic symbols and he's like always stealing the graphic symbols of the other kid, and it's always the symbols for things that he really likes, like the playground and cookies. So methinks you do understand, but when I sit you down to assess, you're not sufficiently motivated to do so, well then I better bring something good to the table to reinforce you for doing what I'm asking, right? Because, sitting around and doing an assessment, especially if you're doing an assessment for somebody that you don't know very well, like if I come in as a consultant, they don't know me, I have no rapport, why would they want to do anything for me? So I better bring something fun, right? And sometimes me, myself, not sufficiently fun. I try, but not sufficiently, so I've got to bring something else. Then you, at the end of the day, really want to think, if you've sort of addressed the task, does he understand the task? I'm pretty sure he knows what the task is. He is sufficiently motivated. He still doesn't seem to understand, right? Is it possible? If that's the case, you can't get a student to demonstrate understanding of any kind of symbol, then you need to kind of go to the easiest kind, which is often objects, right? And start with objects and teach more complex forms. But if I can't get a kid demonstrating that he understands photos or understands picture communication symbols, two-dimensional, if I can't get a student to demonstrate that, I'm gonna use objects, because I'd rather err on the side of he understands than err on the side that he does not understand, right? I'd rather err on the side of too easy and then increase the difficulty over time, then err on the side of making it too difficult and having to go back. Does that make sense? Right, because again, the whole purpose of this is to make information readily accessible to the students we're supporting. Right, so I'd much rather err on it's really accessible than it's really not accessible, okay? So that's an important thing.